Hi everyone, Samantha here. Welcome to another episode of Trans IRL. I'm proud to be the host of this program, and we're going to explore more topics that affect the transgender community with our very special guest tonight. If you're new to the program, please make sure to check out our previous broadcasts, which are still available on our YouTube channel. In addition, if you're not already following us on Instagram, please make sure to head over there to find out the latest on our program scheduling. You'll also have the chance to submit questions for our show, and you'll also have access to the occasional blooper reel as we load them up on there as well. Tonight, for the very first time, our show is being produced from our brand new studio and control room in Santa Monica, California. So Addison is joining us now with our first look at the new digs. Hi, Addison.
That's right, Samantha. So we're still getting things set up here, and that's why it's a little messy in the background and why none of these TVs work yet. It turns out that building a control room takes a considerable amount of time. Who knew? Anyways, I want to show you some video of just what we've been able to accomplish so far. This is a shot of the new TransIRL control room in construction. Now, to the right of this, there's a server rack. It's really the brains of the operation. Has a ton of production and networking gear. It's all stuff that's going to allow us to up the production quality of the show and tell people's stories better. And then one area that I'm really excited about is this little couch area, because this area is where we could have people who are in LA come and join us and do their interviews in person, which is not something we've been able to do before. So I hope to kind of update everyone in a few weeks with, when everything is finished and looks nice and new and not like an episode of Hoarders. But that is how things are right now, and I will send things back to you, Samantha.
I think it looks great so far. I can't wait to check out the studio in person, and hopefully it won't be too long before we have our first local guest who can hop on over and say hi. So during the episode tonight, Addison's going to be scanning the live chat on YouTube for any questions the audience has during tonight's show. It's a great topic. I'm expecting there are going to be some questions. So please, if you have anything you'd like to ask our guest, please make sure to submit your questions in the chat. Tonight, we are going to explore two topics that run very deep in the transgender community, and that's disability and mental health. In a recent survey by the National Center for Transgender Equality, 39% of transgender individuals surveyed self-reported as having a disability. Compare that to an estimated 15% of the general population. So this is something that runs very deep in our community. It's something that affects a lot of people. It's something that a lot of us are facing. Tonight's guest is someone who has faced a disability in their life and has graciously offered to join us here tonight and share their story. So I would like to welcome Nicole Sgarlato to the show. Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
Thanks for having me tonight.
Good.
Absolutely. Good. Hopefully it's not cold where you are. Just about the rest of the country is absolutely freezing today. So hopefully you're somewhere warm.
It's cold for California standards.
All right. Let's get into it. Let's start talking a little bit about your story. So could you start by sharing a little bit about the disability, the physical disability that you faced in your life?
Yeah, of course. So I was born with a birth defect known as proximal femoral focal deficiency. In short, PFFD. That's usually what we refer to it as. And essentially it meant that my leg didn't fully form and wasn't going to continue to grow at the same rate as my other leg. At birth, it looked totally normal. And then when they took me in for my first checkup with a pediatrician, they noticed something was off, ran some tests, figured out what it was. And sure enough, we were seeing specialists here in the Bay Area, and ended up seeing somebody out at Stanford who basically laid out the options for us on how we can handle this. It's different for each person that has it. For me, I essentially, I had a knee. I was missing the kneecap. I was missing my tibia, and my hip ball actually didn't grow initially. So I'm thankful my surgeon was actually a little more conservative. He wasn't pushing to try any experimental surgeries or anything. So what we did was we actually amputated the foot at birth. And I want to say a couple years later, after that, 2-3 years, we went in and we were going to actually build a hip so I could walk. And actually, oddly enough, right before that, something actually grew. So they actually just reinforced it, and then I was able to use that. it was kind of a like, let's just see what happens. So from that point on, I was fitted with a prosthesis. I had a knee originally. I'll get into that more later. I was off walking once I had my leg.
So looking back at those early memories, when did you first realize that you were having to deal with something that other children didn't have to?
I remember, I want to say I was either in kindergarten or first grade, and I remember, it was that version of PE. It wasn't quite PE, but it was like in that period you went out and basically ran around with your friends. And I remember wondering why I couldn't keep up with everyone else. And I came home from school crying, and I remember my mom was the first person I saw, and she comforted me, and she was like, "What's going on?" And I said, "What am I going to be like? When am I going to be like everyone else?" And she's like, "Well, you're not, but like that's okay. You're different, and you have to work a little bit harder, but you can do whatever you put your mind to." And that really resonated with me. At that point, I like embraced the fact like, okay, I'm different, and it's okay. And I was able to adapt very quickly. I think also because it was a birth defect and not lost, later in life. So that mentality really stuck with me through my whole life.
So those prostheses that you were using growing up, how often did those have to be replaced and resized as you were growing?
Yeah. It varied. I'd say through the years that I grew, the most, it would be like once a year. I think up in my parents' rafters, there's a box of about maybe 15 legs, just, hanging out there getting cobwebs.
As you were growing up, going into elementary school, middle school, and into high school, how did your disability affect you, and how did you overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, so, I was very fortunate in that I had a very accepting environment. I didn't really deal with a lot of bullying for my leg, which was really amazing. I'm very fortunate for that. I definitely hadn't quite accepted it, even though I acknowledged that I was different. I still kind of wished I wasn't, right? So I got along just fine. I played sports. I played, Little League my whole life up till, 12, 13 years old. I played around on a skateboard with my friends, as you can see in this picture. I played basketball. Even up through high school. Through senior year, I was on varsity basketball, and I wasn't, the greatest, but I definitely didn't let it stop me. And everyone that I knew was very, I don't know, they were encouraged by me, which was nice.
And you actually went on to accomplish quite a few amazing things in your sporting career. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with the Paralympic team?
Yeah. So at 18, my senior year of high school, I wasn't quite 18 actually. My knee actually started to give me a little bit of trouble. So they had mentioned when I was younger to my parents that that's something that might need to go later. And 18 years old, I just started doing like the math and just thinking long term about what my life would potentially be like. And I figured, let's adapt now while I'm young, and I'll heal quickly. So I actually voluntarily went in and had my knee removed. They actually cut the bones and they fused it together. And initially it was very, obviously it was a pretty long recovery. It took me a little over a year. And after that, I regretted it at first, just because such a drastic change going from a below the knee amputee to an above the knee amputee. And I was afraid I wouldn't be able to run again. I was depressed for a little while, and my prosthetist, who I'd seen since I was 10 years old, he was really awesome. He actually introduced me to a couple Paralympic athletes, ex-Paralympic athletes, who do these programs. They basically travel the world and they teach you how to walk, how to run. And as soon as I saw that and saw what could be done, I was like, that's what I'm doing. So I hooked up with one of them. They actually were based out in New York, and one of them started to train me over basically video and phone, and I just started pushing myself as soon as my body was able to let me, essentially, and I had really good times. So he was like, well, I think you're good to go. This is after about a year of training, and I ran at a qualifying race to get into the nationals, and made it to nationals. And I did that for 3 consecutive years. I ran in the 100 and the 200, the sprinter, and I took second all 3 years. Unfortunately, I didn't make like the actual like worlds or the U.S. like Paralympic team going to like Beijing, because that was the 3rd year I competed, was 2008, and that was my goal. But it was still an awesome experience, and I met so many people, and I was so inspired by just all the other people I met with different disabilities across just the spectrum, and just seeing what they were like capable of, just put me in awe. And I was just so honored to have known some of these people. It's really incredible.
Sounds like an incredible experience overall.
Yeah, most definitely.
So while you were growing up, you obviously were doing very well with what you were dealing with your disability. You were able to accomplish quite a bit, but I did want to turn the conversation a little bit inward towards any questioning that you had with your gender identity at that point.
Yeah, I remember being as young as probably about 7, and started just wishing I was a girl. This was early to mid 90s, so there was not a lot of visibility when it came to anything that was just trans anything, essentially, at least in my world. Internet was still in its early stages, and I just thought I was weird. So I never told anyone. I also was never good with my emotions. I was a very emotional person, but bottled it up, which led to all kinds of problems. And this idea, this feeling like I should have been a girl, it stuck with me, and it kind of come in waves. I compartmentalized it best I could, and then it popped back up again randomly. And I never talked to anyone about it. I just kept it to myself. And it's like that got louder and louder as time went on. Every time it came back, it's that knock was louder, until I couldn't ignore it.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Obviously with a physical disability, it's something that people can see. It's out there in the open. You can't do much to hide it. But when we're dealing with internal struggles, right, our mental health, that's not always as visible, but it's just as important to our overall well-being. So let's talk a little bit more about your journey to getting to where you are today. And let's talk a little bit about your background before you were diagnosed with, well, I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah, pretty young age, I started dealing with OCD, and I didn't know that's what it was at the time. I had really bad intrusive thoughts, and a constant rechecking and checking of things, and it scared me. I was like, what's wrong with me? And I never told anyone. I kept it to myself and did the best I could to kind of I don't know, just keep things make it seem like everything was just fine, I guess. And one of the things and I think this also ties into just being born with my disability, was I learned to adapt very easily. So I was able to adapt to things, but sometimes that was like a problem, in the sense of I never actually figured out my own identity and what it meant to be me. So I was always trying to fit into something else. So the combination of those two things, this never really finding my own identity, but also having OCD and some anxiety along with it, just built over the years. And I ended up, as I got older, I actually started numbing myself with different things. So whether it just be, alcohol, some drugs, even the years I ran, as amazing as they were, it was a period in my life where I was consumed by that. And it really distracted me from just sitting there with myself and getting to know myself. So that went on for, up until I was 26, 27. And one of the things that actually pulled me out of that was I had met somebody, and we started seeing each other, and she had her stuff together. She went to school and she had a good job. So it started to get me to think, okay, I got to start thinking about the future. And I basically stopped numbing myself. And the consequence of that was that I started to have really bad anxiety, and I didn't know that's what it was. It was consuming. It was debilitating. And at her urging, I finally went and saw a therapist. At the same time, I also was introduced by a friend to meditation. So I started cultivating this idea of quiet time, me time, being present with these emotions and these thoughts and these fears and these anxieties, talking about them with the therapist. And it kind of set me on this trajectory that really allowed me to really cultivate my own identity. And I started to understand like who I was and become more comfortable with that. And, it led to some major changes in like the way I was living and what I was doing. But I guess it's hard to believe that I lived that long without realizing just how important it was to take care of, your mental health. And, to this day, I still check in with myself. I have to write. I do still see a therapist, and I encourage anybody. I mean, you might not think anything's wrong with you, and there might not be, but it's still good to talk about things, to know that it's okay to have these feelings, and it's okay to deal with what you're dealing with.
And to share a little bit of my story too, my background with therapy, multiple times as an adult, I actually reached out to therapists to help with anxiety and depression. And at the time, I really struggled with understanding what the point of therapy was. I knew that I had to go to a therapist to maybe get put on anti-anxiety medication to help in that regard, but I was still fighting gender dysphoria and these thoughts that I had been pushing down for a very, very long time. And my hope was that my therapist would just guess that that's what I was facing growing up, or even as an adult when I went to a therapist. And of course, that's not how therapy works. You get out of therapy what you put into therapy. The more open you are, the more you talk about your issues, the more a therapist can actually dive into those issues with you and help you move forward. And I couldn't do that for a long time. So I kind of fell into this cycle with therapy where I'd go in, I'd explain that I'm dealing with depression and anxiety, and I'd be put on antidepressant medication, which would initially help. I'd feel better. But the issue was, once my mindset was generally level, the only thing that was left was those feelings of dysphoria. And when I was left with that, I'd end up going off the medication and being consumed with negative thoughts and anxiety-ridden thoughts, because it was easier in quotation marks to deal with that than to actually deal with the underlying cause. And I ended up doing this something like 3 or 4 times as an adult over the last 10 years before I finally opened up to a therapist and explained to them what I was dealing with. But to your point, Nicole, I agree. A therapist, a good therapist who's willing to work with you is a fantastic way of moving through some of these issues that you have built up for such a long period of time. I know that when I first came out, I was seeing a therapist every week during those early days in transition. And it was essential to keeping me on track and to keeping me level and to making sure that I was moving forward as I should. And I still see my therapist today because it's a good release. It's a good checkpoint. It's a good way of just making sure that everything is going well in your life. Nowadays, we talk less about gender issues and more about the regular day-to-day things that happen. But it is such an important resource in developing sound mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. It's funny too, because my first therapist, this is before I really, because I had these thoughts that I wished I was a woman, but I never really actually thought I was transgender. I just never put those two things together. And my very first therapist, actually, we were talking about it, and she's like, whoa, hold up, like, we should talk about this. I'm like, what is there to talk about? And we literally just like brushed it. I was like, nah, we don't need to talk about this right now. And it wasn't until maybe 3 years later with a different therapist that I was like, okay, maybe there's something here. It's kind of funny.
So what was that like, that initial period of acceptance of your gender identity?
Well, it was actually so many things had led to that moment. Through this like self-awakening of just, learning to just live for me, I felt like I would finally unlock something. I stepped outside of a box, and like I had this like vast unexplored territory that for the first time I didn't care what people thought about me, and whatever that looked like, I was like willing to go with it. And sure enough, one of the first things that came my way was this, feeling I'd had forever. So, in some ways that had prepared me to just kind of like be like, okay, let's do this. Let's check this out, and very quickly I realized that it felt right. And the anxieties that I used to have over just the thought in general started to just not be as loud. And I was like, it's something that I told myself I would do, to live authentic. And that's what this looks like, which is why I'm here right now. I want to live a life that's like visibly authentic. And I want, just by being alive and breathing, to be an example to other people.
It's one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves and others, right? We take this chance to be true to who we are. And moving forward with transition, it's such a freeing thing, or it was such a freeing thing for me. I had this secret for so long, and not having to carry that any longer. I just remember those first couple months after coming out publicly, and just feeling so free and just not burdened any longer. And those feelings have become normal now, but they're still there. Just not having to carry that weight of not being true to myself. It's a good thing. It's a good feeling.
It really is. It really is. It's better than any. Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Go ahead. You're good.
I was just going to say it's better than anything I used to try before to numb myself. It's just, that's one of the greatest feelings in the world. And I just couldn't encourage people enough to just, figure out what it means to be you and to live that.
And how has your journey been so far? How has your life been affected by the start of your transition and as you've moved forward?
Yeah. It's, I'm very fortunate. Relatively speaking, it's been smooth. I had a really rough first year. As I was feeling something and I didn't, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see what I felt. And it took a lot of people in my life a while to come around, just because, I kind of come from a more traditional background, and although they loved me, they just, it's easy to put off, especially when you're not presenting, and nothing really reads as female. But I came out to who I needed to come out to, and ultimately, found a support system, and slowly just, you tackle one thing at a time, right? And I would say probably about 4 months on hormones or so, or 5 months, was right when like I realized that I had started to compartmentalize stuff again, because I was feeling more just from the increased estrogen. And I realized that I needed to let people know that like what support was for me, like how I viewed support. Like you can't just say you support me and then not do anything about it, right? You have to talk to me and ask me what support looks like for me. And that was a breakthrough moment for me. And then my whole life, I'd kind of not really know what I want to do with my life. And I worked at a family business, and I've had an amazing time there for like almost 10 years. And I really appreciate my time there, but never really felt passionate about it. And then when I started to actually transition, it was just a very difficult environment to be in. You're with family, you're with a lot of other folks known for a long time. So I ended up leaving, and I got a job in tech, actually. It's kind of just like a luck of the draw thing, to be honest with you. And it just did like wonders for my transition. I came to a place, a relatively large tech company that's actually pretty well known, and they're very inclusive, or they try to be inclusive when it comes to gender. And I get to this place that, sees me and treats me and, uses the right pronouns, and the bathrooms all say it's a safe space. And it like put my transition through like a warp speed, it feels like, because now I just like the confidence that came from it allowed me to like focus on the other areas of my life and be like, hey, this like needs to get in order. If you guys don't get on board, then my life's just going to keep going, because this is my life now. And it was just this awesome experience that I'm so grateful for. I mean, when I got the job, I actually joked, I'm like, I'll sweep floors. I don't even care. I'm just like happy I'm here. And I think it's important that we continue to make noise in our workplace, because a lot of times it doesn't actually take much to support us or to support people. They just don't know how to. And while you're always going to deal with hate and bigots and people that don't want to be there, I think especially if you work at a place that has other folks that identify a certain way that you can like have a community with, you can have a voice. And where I work, we've actually had some awesome positive things happen because we have a community. So, so that's kind of where I'm at now. Starting to live more of like a quote normal life, right? And just I have my friends and I work, and it's really nice. I mean, I still deal with dysphoria. I have things I still down the road that I'd like to have done, but it's one step at a time.
Another thing I wanted to ask you, you may not know this, but the first time I saw you post online was on Reddit, on the trans timeline subreddit. And I was blown away by the picture you posted there. It was one where you were wearing this great black dress. But I did want to ask, what drove you to be so public with your transition?
Yeah. Even though I'm not a super like aggressive loud person, when you look at me, I'm loud in that sense. I've got lots of tattoos, and while I'm starting to pass sometimes, I hate that word, but I'm starting to like be read as a cis female sometimes. I still oftentimes get clocked as trans, mainly because of my voice. And then my leg, I wear pants that I cut essentially, so you can like see my entire leg, at least from the knee down. And I was like, one thing I've learned, I don't remember the quote right now. There's this like amazing quote from Tyrion from Game of Thrones, and he just talks about how like when you wear something like as your armor, people can't hurt you, something that they would try to hurt you with. And I find that true for everything in my life, when it comes to my disability, my gender identity. If I just embrace it and I own it, while it's scary and it's tough, it's actually I find the best way to deal with it, because I know who I am. And and I touched on this earlier as well. I want to be somebody that can be visible and just let people know that like we exist. I think it's a really important time for that, in this part of the LGBTQ movement is for trans folks right now. There needs to be as much visibility as possible. And I know one of the things that often happens is, as trans folks start to get further along their transition and they kind of blend in more, it's a lot of people don't even realize they're transgender, and totally get that. I mean, I may get there someday myself, but I really want to make sure that I'm doing what I can to bring awareness to something that's so important to so many people.
All right, we do have some questions that were submitted through Instagram, so I want to go to those now. And our first question here is, do people react more readily to your physical disability or to your identity as a trans person?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I think initially my disability, to be honest with you, just because it's like, I don't hide it and I get around just fine. And I think once people start looking at me because of my leg, then they start to see, oh, you're transgender. But I guess it depends on the situation. I mean, sometimes I'll wear skirts and you can't see it, right? And I think as soon as I get in a conversation, I oftentimes get weird looks just because my voice is a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. And, before transition, if you had any attention from your disability as well.
Well, the funny part is I didn't cut my pants before the transition. So I just wore kind of baggy jeans, and if you look close enough, I had a little bit of a limp sometimes, and I'm just like lazy and not walking the way I should be walking. So people, they didn't often notice. I can just kind of blend in, except unless I was wearing shorts or like bathing suit. But I like skinny jeans now, and I was like, they just look really funny if I like try to use them to cover this like mechanical leg. So I was like, again, just trying to embrace it and own it. I'm just going to cut them. So I did it. People definitely stare more now because I just show it off, but I was never afraid to before. It was just the way that the clothes fit, basically.
All right. Next question. What was a bigger challenge, overcoming your disability or coming to terms with your gender identity?
Ooh, that's a really good question. You know, it's tough to say because my disability really prepared me for to tackle my gender identity. So I don't know if I could really answer that, you know, in an honest way, but they definitely go hand in hand. I think there was more anxiety around, like it took longer to accept my disability, I think, in the sense of like truly accepting it. But it's like once I figured that out, I actually was able to use some of that knowledge I had from that to actually like, you know, learn to accept my gender identity. So I think it's more just because I was confronted with it first, right out of the gate, that it was probably more difficult.
And I think you already touched on this. The next question is, did any of your coping mechanisms from your disability help you when you move forward with your transition?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I mentioned before, my ability to adapt. And in this case, I would say that it did help me with that transition. I was able to, I don't know, as I started meeting people and making new friends, I was able to kind of fit in and do the best I could to fit in at least. And that helped me. But yeah, I'm kind of at a loss, to be honest with you, of other things right at the moment.
All right. Fair enough. I think those were all the questions that we had pre-submitted, but I did want to check in with Addison and see if we have any questions from our live chat tonight.
Yeah, we did have 3 questions tonight. The first one is from Lauren. You might know her as Lauren Joe. This one's for Nicole. She asked, "Did you use sports to overcompensate and and make the female girl thoughts go away?"
It's possible when I was younger and I didn't realize it. Um, I remember wanting to play sports because my friends played sports, and then it became like a community you built. You know, I was in the same little league with friends forever, and I genuinely love competing regardless. I mean, if my body wasn't so beat up, I'd like consider running again and trying to make it to the Paralympics as a woman. But my body just, you know, won't take it. But I will say, I mean, I think I touched on this earlier too, that you know, when I ran for the Paralympics, that was definitely as, you know, as an adult, and I used that period of my life to definitely continue to distract myself. I mean, it was a positive thing in the sense that I was doing something really cool and awesome, and it was great for my body and just overall, but it was a distraction for sure.
Okay, we did have one other question from Lauren Joe as well. And this is actually for both of you. When you were struggling with depression and you started working with a therapist, did you hope that he or she might know of another route besides transition? Samantha, you want to start?
Sure, I'll start with this one. Transitioning is pretty much the last thing I actually wanted to do. If there was any way out where I didn't have to do this, I probably would have taken it. Honestly, I think I fought those demons myself before I ever made it to the therapist. I think in the struggles that I had in that year or so leading up to actually coming out to Laura, my wife, I had pretty much accepted that the only way I was going to be able to continue to live would be to transition. So I don't think I was looking for a solution or a way out of it at that point. I think by the time I sat down with a therapist, I was looking for the way forward.
And Nicole?
That's a good question. I think because I just continued to compartmentalize and went to therapy and dealt with other things for so long that I really I didn't think about how to deal with it. it wasn't until I actually had made a kind of a major breakthrough when it came to just like learning that like the only reason I like, believed and the only reason like that I lived the life I lived was just because life was the way I was born, it was like what I was born into. And because of that, I like had this like awakening. I stepped outside of my box, and I'd already been going to therapy. And I think at that point, once I like confronted my gender identity again, I was kind of like ready to go in a sense, right? Like transition, like I had seen pictures before and I knew it was like around based on the internet. And I was just like ready to tackle it head on.
Okay, we do have one more question for you, Nicole. This one is from Tiffany in the chat. She asked if you ever felt overwhelmed because you're trans and you have a disability.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I especially initially when I started transitioning, I really struggled with, like beauty standards, and my legs essentially like titanium and carbon, and it's not like necessarily like sexy, and I worried what it would be like wearing like dresses or what have you. And at first it actually did cause me some anxiety, and that's kind of gone away. I remember feeling very exposed when I started presenting and my leg was showing off. And that was really tough, but that went away actually fairly quickly once I just like started doing it. And I had some experience in the sense of I'd been an amputee my whole life anyways, but the only difference was my presentation. So yeah, it's been there, but it's gotten better.
Okay, and then one more question for Nicole. This is also from the chat. What was the most difficult part of transitioning for you?
That's a tough one. I'd probably say, at first it was, you think it's like the coming out, right? And it's actually not for me. It wasn't that at all. I mean, it was tough, but I think it ended up being like the interpersonal relationships you already had and like how you navigate those, because I did have many people I knew. I have a very large family, and I have a large extended family, and I had lots of friends, and just you come out to them and maybe they accept you, but there's still a lot to navigate. And I think that has been the most difficult part, hands down. I mean, I definitely still struggle with dysphoria. It happens less and less the times that it really hits me. But so far, when I reflect, I would say, my relationships with people that I knew before my transition.
Okay, and that's it for questions. I'll send it back to you two.
Great. Thanks, Edison. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for sharing so much of your story today. I know that these topics aren't really easy to talk about, and the reality is there's still a pretty big stigma around, speaking about physical disabilities or mental health. But both are so important to, be aware of and to understand a little bit better. And I think what you've shared tonight is extremely helpful to everyone in the community and outside the community. So thank you very much for your time here.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here, and I hope that I can somehow, just having my story out there, helps at least one person.
Absolutely. And if you're not already following Nicole on Instagram, please make sure to follow her. I know we've had the bug up under her name here tonight. So there we are. Please go over and check out her page as well. All right. I did want to take a minute here to talk about our episode next week. And as much as I enjoy being your host every week, next week's episode is going to be a little bit different. I'm actually going to be turning the microphone over to my wife, Laura. And Laura will be joined by several other spouses and significant others of people who have transitioned during a relationship to share their experiences and feelings from their perspective. I know this is something that people have asked for. I'm really excited to bring this episode to everyone here. And I think it's going to be a really great conversation because, especially today, and especially more and more as time goes on here, transition is affecting people in relationships, and those relationships are surviving. So it's going to be a great conversation. I'll be hiding somewhere else in the house while Laura's down here talking, and she'll be, speaking freely, as will the other spouses who are joining her. Next week's episode is going to air a day earlier than usual. It'll air next Wednesday, and it'll also be an hour later. So I just want everyone to be aware of those times. And it'll actually be 8:30 LA time. So we'll get those times updated, and they'll be correct on our Instagram page. So look for the updates there. Our questions for next week's episode should go live by Monday. So if you'd like to submit questions for that episode, please do so. And I look forward to watching the episode with you. So let's get everyone back on here really quick. Before we go, I do want to take another second here to share something exciting with everyone who's watching right now. We actually have a new logo for the show. This is something we've been waiting for a while. Here's our brand new logo. I think it's awesome, a great representation of what we're doing here. And this logo is actually possible due to a gracious donation from Rundown Creator. They put up the funding to get that logo designed for us, and we are very thankful for that donation. So we'll get all of our graphics updated. You'll see the changes on our Instagram, YouTube, and on our show for next week. Any parting thoughts from our guest?
I guess to the theme of just, being authentic and learning to love yourself. I think it's one of the most important gifts you can give to yourself. And I would encourage anybody just to figure out what that looks like for you.
I wholeheartedly agree. Addison, from the control room, how are things looking? How do we do?
Looking good. We've had more people viewing today. I think we're starting to figure out this YouTube live streaming thing. It's actually more complicated than you would think, but they don't make it easy. But yeah, 28 people watching right now, which is more than has been in the past. So that's very exciting.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We love to do this show live. We love the participation, and we'll continue to do this. We've got some great guests coming up for you over the next couple of weeks. I'm really excited to share them with you. I can't share them quite yet, but I will post updates when we can. So with that said, I'd like to say thank you from everyone here at Trans IRL, and we will see you next week.